Imagine the scene: Chicago, 1893. The world's eyes are on the city's spectacular World's Fair, a gleaming white city of electric lights promising a bright future. But just miles away, a charismatic doctor, H. Holmes, has built a hotel with a much darker purpose. The newspapers would later call it the Murder Castle, spinning tales of a diabolical labyrinth with windowless rooms, secret passages, and gas pipes to silently kill guests. They claimed chutes dropped bodies to a basement filled with horrors. The man behind it, Holmes, was branded America's first serial killer. But how much of this terrifying legend is actually true? Today, we're separating the man from the myth to uncover the horrifying reality of the Murder Castle. Long before he was H. Holmes, he was Herman Webster Mudgett. Born in 1861. By most accounts, he was brilliant but possessed a chilling lack of empathy, viewing people as mere tools for his own ends. Stories claim his cruelty started young, performing crude surgeries on animals. He chose to attend medical school at the University of Michigan, not to heal, but to learn how to profit from the human body. It was there he began his first major scam, stealing cadavers from the lab. He'd take out fraudulent life insurance policies, disfigure the bodies, and then claim the cash from fake accidents. Even before he ever killed a living person, Holmes was already profiting from the dead. By 1886, after leaving a trail of scams in his wake, he changed his name to Dr. Henry Howard Holmes and landed in Chicago, a city on the verge of a global spectacle, and for him, the perfect hunting ground. Once in Chicago, Holmes got a job at a pharmacy in the Englewood neighborhood. Popular legend says he charmed the owner, a Mrs. Holton, into selling him the business and then simply made her vanish. The truth, however, is less dramatic. There's no evidence she was one of his victims, and records show she lived for years after their transaction. With the pharmacy as his base, Holmes aimed higher. The city was gearing up for the 1893 World's Fair, an event that would bring millions of tourists to his doorstep. Holmes bought an empty lot across the street and began constructing a massive, three-story structure he called the World's Fair Hotel. But he acted as his own architect, with a secret plan in mind. He constantly hired and fired different construction crews. This not only allowed him to avoid paying them, but it also ensured that no one but him could possibly understand the building's truly bizarre and terrifying layout. The legend of the Murder Castle is the stuff of nightmares, but it's mostly just that, a legend fueled by a sensationalist press. Newspapers ran wild with stories, claiming the hotel was a high-tech torture palace with soundproofed rooms, secret gas lines controlled from Holmes's own bedroom, and alarms that would trap any guest trying to escape. So, what was real? The building's architecture was incredibly strange. The second floor was a maze of hallways that led to brick walls, staircases that went nowhere, and doors that could only be locked from the outside. While the building was undoubtedly a fire trap and a terribly constructed mess, there's no credible evidence for the elaborate mechanical traps or the gas jets. The horror wasn't in complex machines, but in the confusing, chaotic design that allowed Holmes to control the space and move through it completely unnoticed. If the upper floors were the trap, then according to the press, the basement was the butcher shop. They painted a gruesome picture: a blood-spattered dissecting table, vats of acid, and a giant kiln for cremating bodies. When investigators finally got down there, the reality was still horrifying, but far less cinematic. They did find a dissecting table along with surgical instruments and bone fragments. But the giant crematory and vats of acid were never found. Holmes was dissecting bodies in his basement, but it wasn't an industrial-scale disposal factory. He was stripping the flesh from skeletons, which he then bleached and sold to medical schools, a ghoulish trade he had perfected back in college. Over the years, the legend has only grown, and so has the supposed body count. The most famous claim is that Holmes killed up to 200 people during the World's Fair. But what's the real number? Holmes himself gave several contradictory confessions, at one point claiming 27 murders, though some of the people he named were later found alive and well. While the true number is probably higher than what can be proven, modern historians can only definitively link Holmes to 9 murders. The figure of 200 is almost certainly a myth born from yellow journalism. The problem is, this myth of 200 unknown victims often overshadows the very real, tragic stories of the people we know for certain that he killed. While the castle has become the symbol of his evil, the most heartbreaking and well-documented of Holmes's crimes happened far away from it. Benjamin Petezel was a carpenter and a longtime accomplice in Holmes's various scams. Together, they planned to fake Petezel's death to collect on a $10,000 insurance policy. Holmes was supposed to procure a substitute cadaver to stage the accident. Instead, he murdered Petezel for real, knocking him out with chloroform and setting his body on fire. But he didn't stop there. In an act of almost unbelievable cruelty, Holmes then went to Petezel's unsuspecting wife, convinced her that her husband was alive and merely in hiding, and persuaded her to give him custody of 3 of her 5 children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard. He then traveled across the United States and Canada with the kids, all while telling their frantic mother one lie after another. Eventually, investigators found the bodies of Alice and Nellie buried in a Toronto cellar. Later, they found the charred remains of young Howard in an Indianapolis cottage. Holmes had murdered the children of the man he'd already killed, all just to cover his tracks. The story of H. Holmes reveals a darkness that is almost hard to comprehend. If you find these deep dives into the chilling corners of history compelling, take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. Ironically, it wasn't the disappearances from his murder castle that led to Holmes's downfall, but simple greed. A fellow criminal whom Holmes had double-crossed in the Petezel insurance scam tipped off the Pinkerton Detective Agency. They began pursuing him, not for a string of murders, but for fraud. Holmes was finally arrested in Boston in November 1894. Only after his arrest did the full investigation begin, led by Philadelphia detective Frank Geyer. It was Geyer who painstakingly tracked Holmes's journey with the Petezel children, eventually uncovering their graves and securing the evidence needed to charge him with murder. The supposed architect of a legendary murder fortress was ultimately brought down by a simple Conhh. Holmes went on trial in Philadelphia, not for the castle's horrors, but for the murder of Benjamin Petezel. Acting as his own lawyer, he was quickly found guilty and sentenced to death. Before his execution, the Hearst newspapers paid him $7,500 for his confession, a document filled with lies and wild claims, seemingly designed to cement his own dark legend. On May 7, 1896, H. Holmes was hanged. Reportedly, his neck didn't snap, and he strangled slowly for over 15 minutes. In a final paranoid act, he asked for his casket to be encased in cement, terrified that his own body would be stolen and dissected, just as he had done to so many others. The murder castle itself was damaged by a fire and finally torn down in 1938. Today, a post office stands on the site. The horrors of the building are gone, but the story remains. Even after stripping away all the myths, the reality of H. Holmes is that of a charming, utterly depraved man who twisted the American dream into a blueprint for murder. His confirmed crimes are more than enough to secure his place as one of the most monstrous figures in American history.